got an impressive resume. Just make sure you read over that because not very many of us tennis players have this kind of resume. Mark's been here in Kansas City for 20 years. Besides all this, he's been a lot of park and rec programs. Probably volunteered his time on a lot of things. So sit back and enjoy and give him your attention. I think you're going to learn a lot today.
Thank you and welcome. Appreciate all of you guys being here this early hour. So yeah, this is your brain on tennis. It appears in the flyer as if it's called the tennis brain, which was Tim Shanahan to thank for that. Bill Guilfoyle, who's in the audience, where's Bill? Is he getting a coffee right now? There he is. This is the tennis brain right here. So I don't want to claim that title by any stretch. I think it was more appropriately called This Is Your Brain on Tennis, and this is who I am. What this doesn't tell you is that while I was at OP Racket Club, I did a lot of programming at 103rd and Marty, which was a great outdoor public facility. Did a Parks and Rec program and spent a lot of time sort of honing the craft. As a freelance element out there, I'd go into OP Racket Club in the winters and teach, and I was free to kind of explore my own approach to the game. And the Science of Consciousness Conference is where a lot of this information, it's kind of this ongoing education program for MDs and postdocs, and it's where this cutting edge information on this self-aware experience that we're having is being presented. And so this conference is kind of a landmark conference that used to be called Towards the Science of Consciousness, because consciousness at the time that I graduated from Amherst was kind of a dirty word. It was something that really couldn't be measured. It was a bit like mentioning the buggy whip forehand of Rafa Nadal. You know, it was kind of this unorthodox thing. And so neuroscience was at that point was based on this model that was called the neurocomputational model, and there was this thing called the neural doctrine, which says that all of the motor activity is governed by the motor cortex, and it's sending signals down to the body. And the problem with that is that neural processing is very slow. Chemical signaling is actually not that fast. It takes a half second. This is well established in the literature. Kirkland and I were talking about it yesterday. Experiments were done actually on a tennis court with a tennis player at one point. The guy was strapped to an EEG machine. The guy hits a serve. The return of server who's strapped to the EEG machine. The brain actually fires a half second after you've returned the serve. So the question is, where's the processing? How does this occur? We didn't really have a good explanation. And even if you look up or muscle memory, you know, you can look it up. You'll see that it's a well understood term. We know that it's occurring, but there's no explanation for why and how it actually occurs. And so we don't know the mechanism. And so at this conference, this evidence is surfacing that is starting to explain that. So it's very exciting. So really excited to be here, and especially in the company of some of these, of all of the other speakers, I should say, particularly Woody and Sarah and Thiago. It's really been a great conference, and I think I'm going to try to tie this together with much of what I've learned from you guys. So this is the supplementary motor area in the brain, this area right here. And if you go to the very top of your head, that's where it is. And this is our area of the brain. This is the tennis-centric area of the brain. And it was discovered in a really interesting way. Basically, there was a guy in a vegetative coma. So he's laying there, he's non-responsive. He's basically brain dead, you would say. Except that when the neuroscientists stuck him in a functional MRI machine, they saw some activity in the brain in certain areas. And so they said, they knew that this area was pretty much still active. So they said, think of a person playing tennis. This person didn't even play tennis. And this particular area lit up, the SMA, the supplementary motor area. And then they said, well, think of somebody walking in their own house. And this slightly different area, in the same region, but different, lit up. And this constituted a yes and a no framework. So If you understand what I'm saying, think of a person playing tennis, and the person did. If the answer is no, think of somebody walking in their own home. And so this was kind of a breakthrough. This guy, Stephen Loris in Belgium, did the experiment. And neuroscientists learned at this point that consciousness was not localized anywhere. You could be essentially brain dead and be having a fully conscious experience. So if you've got a loved one in a coma, God forbid, just know that they can be hearing you, and they can be fully intact, or even though they might be in a vegetative state. But what's exciting for us tennis players is that we found out that we had our own area, and this was substantiated with other studies where they went in and basically asked a bunch of people, think tennis, and this area lit up. So we're going to learn a little bit about this area and why that's so important. Essentially, the takeaway from this is going to be this concept called chunking. This is well established in the literature. Anybody that's teaching should know this. So chunking is like, linguistically or in a sentence, I would say something like, I went to the zoo. You can learn the sentence in chunks, right? To the zoo, went I, And there's a feed forward to kind of what you want to express. So, I'm headed to the zoo, so I think of the zoo, and then, I went to the zoo. The other chunks just pop out. In tennis, the feed forward aspect goes to the most important part of the swing, which is going to be the contact point, the load. That's going to be the most important chunk. The feeling of the sweet spot. And so typically what people do when they teach, right, is they are going to teach step one first, setup. Does everybody do that? You're going to teach the setup, right? Second stage, third. Well, that ends up being a little bit tricky, because what the brain is going to do there is it's going to assign the hierarchy to the first step. The second will be the second. It won't want to go to the second step till it gets to the first. So if on a return or serve, you're having to go right to the hitting zone, you might find your students are a little bit late. So the main takeaway here is to build a robust timing mechanism. You want to chunk the thing out of sequence, basically, so that the most important step is going to be the point of contact. Okay, so that's going to be the main takeaway. And so in order to do that, I've kind of structured the talk non-sequentially. So you'll see that in a sec here. Okay, so this graph is showing you kind of where the breakthrough came at the Science of Consciousness Conference. And what we're looking at here is a cell. So this is going on in your body right now. This is a cell dividing through mitosis, the DNA separating, and you can see that there are these filaments in a cell. And basically what's happening is this mesh right here is the cytoskeleton of cells. So this mesh is in every cell in your body, and it's basically where these signals are. You have these oscillations that are occurring there. And so at the Science of Consciousness Conference, there's a guy there named Stuart Hameroff who puts on the conference, and he got together with this guy named Roger Penrose from Oxford, who was a contemporary of Stephen Hawking, and they came up with this theory saying consciousness is basically being processed at this level, at this scale. So we're going deep within cells. It's not a neural phenomenon. So it's happening at about a millionth of a meter small. This is where anesthetics are working. Stuart Hameroff is an anesthesiologist. He figured out, well, anesthetics are working at this scale, so this has to be where it's happening. Penrose was looking for what is called a quantum biological processor, so a switch basically that can do computation at that scale. And I won't get into the dynamics of all that, but this has been in evidence. It's a very powerful explanation, and it solves a lot of the problems. It explains how information can be everywhere at once at this scale. So you get the picture. So the picture of the forehand can now go to every part of the body. It doesn't have to be this chemical signaling that's a half second late, basically. So, and so this is just a scaling diagram to show you how small we're going. We're going a millionth of a meter small, and this is the microtubule. So these things would stack into these little polymers, these little columns that form this mesh. Okay, so just want to introduce that to you. Okay. So we're going to go back here. So this is I couldn't find a better model here. so you're stuck with me. Basically, this is what is called the Sierpinski gasket, named after a Polish mathematician. And I'm demonstrating here how chunking occurs in the body, okay? And nowhere in the brain is this diagram, obviously, but it describes perfectly how energy is used, and you'll understand why the chunking is important and what happens as something gets automated. So here you see, I'm chunking the approach to the hitting zone, the contact point. So I've got 3 chunks. Even if you introduce 15 steps in a stroke, the kid or the adult is they're basically going to break it down into 3 steps. There's always a 3-step hierarchy in chunking. So it's going to fall into 3 things. That's how the person's going to grab it. So as a coach, you might want to think about, what are the 3 most important things you want to get in place. I would show the whole mechanism, and then go to each chunk, and then figure out which chunk is the most important, and put that in place first. And then over a sequence of time, we go and correct the other pieces. So if I push this, we get a little movement out of the deal. Nothing too fancy here, but basically as this pattern repeats itself, then as it becomes automated, it's going to go to these smaller triangles, and the amount of space that's being used in the bigger triangles is going to be conserved. And so you're going to get this conservation of energy. It's going to become, the brain doesn't like to use any more energy than it needs to, so it's going to become more energy efficient. And then as it goes to the smaller scale, it'll be traveling to that mesh, to that cytoskeleton, to the microtubulin, and the information starts going everywhere. Okay? So that's basically an illustration of what's in place here. Improvisational subjective induction. So this was a theory I presented at the conference, and you might be wondering how a guy like me, a tennis coach like you, gets into a conference like this and gets taken seriously. And part of what I did was I went in there and said, I'm presenting a theory. It's a tennis-centric approach to consciousness, meaning if anything being presented here is not relevant to understanding my tennis game or improving how I teach it, then it's either a bad explanation or it's terribly flawed. And that community got the joke. They thought that was cool because it was a form of speaking back to the conference. And what it pointed to was that in an interdisciplinary approach to the sciences, people tend to look for the answers from the domain of their expertise. And so it was, so it turned out to be a valid approach because we're on the front lines of learning and we're putting these motor behaviors in place. And in some ways, because it's less abstract than what you would learn in a classroom, you're actually trying to pull the sequence together, they're integrating it into play. There's a huge, factor involved with how consciousness is kind of coming up to speed with the task that we're asking of our students. And so our intuition for what constitutes learning is going to be a lot better than somebody that's just dealing with it in an abstract framework. So basically what this is showing is the different scale. And over here we have the sun. The sun is 1 million meters wide, right? And so what we're doing is we're going 1 million meters small to get to these tubulin structures. They stack into the polymers. They're vibrating. There's information there, and it's scaling up. So this is a neuron, a pyramidal cell. The neuron is these pyramidal cells are associated with awareness. That's where we're processing this information. That's where you're a self-aware entity. Humans have a lot of pyramidal neurons, and that's what distinguishes. The brain is happening at a different scale than the neurons. You're scaling up. So brain, we all have a sense of how big that is. Neurons are about 1,000th of a meter small. Like I said, we're going to about 1,000,000th of a meter small, and then even smaller. So as you get to the small scale, the physics is a little different too. This is what Einstein and these guys as early as the 1920s were trying to establish. And they came up with this idea called quantum theory, which describes how a different set of rules applies at that scale. So because consciousness can permeate scale, basically in performance, and here's It's an additional piece that you can take away. When you're at the fine scale, you're feeling the space. So you're in a feel state. Okay? So if you're thinking about, like, and you can think about it in the context of music, if you've ever been to a concert or, listening, you can think about the music or you can feel the music. You'll tend not to do the same thing at any one moment. It might oscillate. You might have a moment of the feel state and a moment of hyper-awareness. But really what you want to do is reside in the feel state. So the feel state is essentially the zone. When people say, be the ball, it's not an expression that means much of anything, but it does, right? Because the person is dialing into the environment. They're feeling the space. And there's some other words here that are associated with it. Criticality is a very important concept in the study of consciousness. And it's actually a state that can be measured. And so criticality, what that means is that's when something is on the edge of chaos. And in the tenocentric approach to consciousness, criticality is the ready position. And it's the dynamic instability of the ready position. What that means is that the ready position is not a stable position, right? You're catching yourself from falling in the direction of the shot. So what that does is it dials you into the field. If you do that correctly and it's well timed, you're becoming, highly attuned to whatever external stimulus is going to trigger this whole cascade effect. And so criticality is like, another way to describe it is like when water goes to a boiling point. It's not quite at the boiling point, but it's about to undergo a phase change. Or another way it's demonstrated is like when you have a pile of sand in an hourglass, right? And you get to that point where one little grain will cause the whole cascade to tumble down. So that's a brain state in which, when you're in the ready position and somebody like Agassi was reading Becker's, I think his tongue went off to one side when he was serving, right? So he was dialing into one piece of stimulus. He may not even have been aware of what it was to figure out, how to go early on the returns. So criticality is a certain mental mindset that you can get into. And this was studied in improvisational jazz players, which we could stick those guys in the functional MRI with a modified keyboard. We couldn't do it with tennis players because the machine is too big, obviously. And we could take a look at what that state is. So it involves the dynamic instability of the ready position. You got an improvisational state. When you're in the zone, you have, and this is what these improvisational jazz players experience. They felt like, and these were very proficient players. They were experts. They felt like another intelligence was working through them. And there was a disassociation of the cortical hub, so the areas of the brain that give rise to your sense of self are basically turned off. And qualitatively, they described it just like Federer does when he's playing. He's been said to say that I'm not really thinking much about anything. I have a rough sense of what's coming 6 or 7 shots down, but the mind is basically quiet. And then it's associated with this transcendent feeling. It's actually, you have these people that are like these non-dual meditators that learn how to turn off the ego, so they experience the space directly. Yeah, so basically I'll show them the whole swing. I might, to emphasize the point of contact, what I might do is have them go from the point of contact to the follow-through. And so we can do a little drill where I can maybe take some of you on the court and show you how I would do it with, you can do it with 6 to 8 year olds. You can do it with, adults. Anybody that's just plumping in. So this is a picture of a brain where you have the disassociation of the cortical hub. So this was one of the improvisational jazz players. And what I'm saying is that a tennis player's brain would look very similar to this in a functional MRI. And so we're getting closer to understanding what the mindset is of a high-performance athlete. And like I said, we can describe it qualitatively. We can now begin to define it quantitatively. This is actually, a configuration that you can. It's looking at glucose consumption. It's looking at how the brain is working while these activities are going on. So that said, let's go back to skill acquisition. We have people here that are teaching Parks and Rec programs and high school kids, and so let's bring this down to a really basic level. So basically, we're just going to do drop and hits. This is going to be very simple. So everybody on one side.
Teaching a loop with a fixed wrist. Now, I know that Sarah was talking about getting racket head speed out of the wrist, but the problem is if we do that, we're not building it from the ground up, and we're going to lose the kinetic sequence. So in order to preserve that, I'm going to constrain that. And that's another aspect of using neuroscience to kind of put things in place. You introduce constraints to drive the learning in the direction of what you want. So one of the things I'm looking for is kinetic sequence. So it's building itself from the ground up, the bottom up. Okay, so and we're teaching a loop. We're teaching a loop with a fixed wrist. So basically, this is the pattern, and I'm going to have the person freeze right here. Now, what they'll do is they'll go past it, right? But we're going to have them come back here and freeze right here because this is the pathway we're trying to put in place. And the reason I don't go right to the point of contact is because I want that to be a feel state. So I want them to experience the sensation of that. Now, what Sarah did was she had the ball on the strings here, as you recall, and the person pushed off. And that's great. I know Perkins does, Anthony here, who's my tennis here, he has this wonderful way where you brush off of it. In E, we do tap and touches, right? Where you catch it. Those are all variations, so I think many of you will relate to them. So let's go ahead and just do a drop and hit. So I'll have the kids line up, I'll look at, just set up for a second. So we're setting up, and I'm looking on the setup, I can and shape it and say, do this, get your feet lined up here, and I'm going to act like this is all very particular. I want it to stick right here. Okay, and fire, and then hold your finish. Fire and hold the finish. I want you to come back to this moment here, put the chin on the shoulder. Now, I'm not establishing an orthodoxy for how I want the swing to go. I want this up here, and I might have the kid really tweak it, even though it doesn't matter. What I'm trying to get him to do is to dial into that moment. All right, so let's do another drop and hit, and I want you to swing to the follow through. Freeze and come back to the follow through. Put the chin on the shoulder. This shoulder. What's the matter? No. Beautiful. Pivot right there. No, pivot this way. Yeah. There we go, right? Okay, let's do it again and swing to that position. So basically what we've got here is a chunking process now in which the functional hierarchy is going to the point and come back to the follow through, right? Let's see it. And then, yeah, so now, the beginning of my Parks and Rec classes, I would have the kids come out and do this, and I would just observe. And they love it. People love it because it's something they can manage. There's no, you're slowing it down so they can get the motor behavior. Then you can turn it into a drill, switch, run over, and then drop the ball, go back in line. So why don't you guys do that for a second and show the progression. So just this back to that moment is the correction. Okay. All right. So
chunks. The other thing is we're setting up what is called a neural net, right? Those chunks constitute a neural net. This is an example of pyramidal neurons, a vague sense of what a neural net would look like. These are the pyramidal neurons that are giving, again, rise to the attentional awareness. Now, there's a difference between attentional awareness, right, and the feel state. And let's take a moment here and do a quick little non-dualistic meditation, okay? So let's have everybody stand up for a second. And what I want you to do is just kind of rock on your toes from one side to the other and just feel your body. And so as soon as you do this, as soon as you're rocking from one side to the other, you're engaging your proprioceptive system. So your proprioception is your body's sense of itself from distortions in tension. So as you rock from one side to the other, now you've engaged the system. Now, your proprioception was engaged when you were sitting there, right? But you may not have been aware of it. because that's something that you're comfortable with. So take a moment and feel what your hands are feeling. Go ahead and put your hands out there and feel the space with your hands. And then draw, you can have your eyes lightly closed and draw your attentional awareness back into the body, into the trunk. And then let it drift down the legs. And feel, for example, what your toes are feeling at this moment. A moment ago, you may not have been aware of what your toes are feeling, but they were feeling something. They have the capacity of awareness, and you just are delivering your attentional awareness down there. And draw that back in and keep rocking from side to side. This rocking motion, which tennis players love to do, right? This is the key, because it's triggering the left brain, right brain, undulating current up the spine. And so you'll see athletes gravitate to this. And it's anchored, this corridor is anchored right up to the SMA, the supplementary motor area, which is now right at the top of the brain. Now, if you come up on your toes and do it, you're basically starting to put yourself in that zone, in that mindset. So this is all it takes. Okay? So everybody relax, have a seat. Are we getting this? Is it a yes or no? All right, if you're getting it, when I say get it, you say got it, I say good. Get it? Good. Let's do it faster though. I want a quicker response. Get it? Good. All right. That's neuroscience right there.
Okay, so we're going to go back and take a look at how energy is conserved in the Sierpinski triangle here. And so in the first space, I think this is really important for understanding it, so I just want to run through it really quickly. So when you first look at something that you're trying to learn, the whole brain uses all this energy, right? And basically what you're doing is you're extracting this pyramid out of the center. When you do that, you're still looking at the whole pattern. The pattern is preserved, but you've saved energy. That's why it goes to 3 steps. It wants to use as little energy as possible to do as much as it can. And that system of making little triangles, so then it goes in and it creates another equilateral triangle there, and there. And now you've got more perimeter, and your area is disappearing. The area correlates with energy consumption. And what happens is you can scale down. So you're beginning to see how consciousness, as it goes to this smaller scale, can get a richer amount of information. So the feel state is richer, it has more information. That's why you want to be there. You don't want to be thinking. It's a slow process to be thinking. You're going to inform. It's a negative feedback loop. You're going to inform yourself of the mistake you made. You're going to correct it in the sequence. But when you go to hit the ball, you want to be in that feel state. So this is the Sierpinski gasket, and that's why we were using that image to sort of construct it. I'm trying to create these illustrations so it'll be easier for us to, as coaches, to sort of, understand this process and deliver it. But we're really on the big brink of a paradigm shift, and this is new information. You guys are all going to be on the cutting edge of this breakthrough, understanding consciousness. So here's what it looks like in the 3D space. You can see the space is disappearing, and this is still the Sierpinski gasket, and you get this beautiful hexagonal array. Now the hexagonal array is a 6-sided configuration, and you see the brain loves hexagonal arrays. This is everywhere in the brain. When you look at the brain under a microscope, this is kind of what you see, because the spaces in between the neurons have these little connection molecules, and they're 6-sided molecules and they're stacked. So you have these hexagonal corridors, so it has this honeycomb effect, basically. But you see it at the small scale, you see it at the very fine scale, and you see it at the big scale. And basically what a hexagonal array can do is it can have a plus on one side and a minus on the other, right? So it's a polarized field. And this can channel neural signals. So this is how the information moves, okay? So, and again, you can see how the scaling, it doesn't matter how big or small it is, information can now move from the macro level where we're having this conversation to the feel state where you're feeling the conversation. Okay, so I want to go. Geez, I'm aggressive with these buttons. So this is a picture of a rat. This experiment was done by this guy named Mosier. He won the Nobel Prize for this. He's going to be at the conference this year in April. So I'm going to be there and get to pick his brain a little bit. But this is essentially how you map out a tennis court. You have a virtual court in your brain. You really are playing the inner game. And there's an individual neuron So you have an individual, they stuck an electrode into an individual neuron, so when a person goes over a certain spot, that neuron fires. And then down here is another neuron assigned to a different spot, and it's this hexagonal array, it forms the whole court. You're going to have a feeling for one part of the court, as if it were a living, breathing entity. You might have a different feeling in the, you know, if you're not a net, if you're a baseliner, you know, unless you're a Thiago, training on clay, but likes to go to net, you know, you might have a different feeling, right, for the net game. But areas of the court, it's going to get animated. Anything that's in, you know, that's in the brain, the inner game. That's why people they bend the knee to kind of get that ball to curl in. They're trying to bend the court. It's a human instinct. It's very natural because the court is animated. That schema, and it's occurring in this area right here on the rat brain. This is called the entorhinal cortex. In the human brain, it's right here. It's in the midbrain. It's deep within. So you actually have a virtual grid of the court right there. And this explains, if you guys ever notice how people avoid the lines, there's a lot of players. I've seen Rafa do it, Sharapova, Agassi, you know. And so this resistance to the lines is actually putting data in the grid. So the picture of the court is becoming richer by that. So it explains certain superstitions, idiosyncratic behaviors. They're doing time-wise. Okay, we're good. All right, so basically the grid is going to go from the center of the brain. It's going to get shot up to the SMA. When it's here, the frontal lobe is thinking now. That's going to slow it down, right? The frontal lobe is your thinking system. But look at this corridor. It goes right down the center through the cerebellum, which is right here, and the medulla oblongata, which is the brainstem. And it's from here that you get the undulation of the signals that form where muscle memory is housed, basically. So, so if you were to take out the outer layers of the brain, you'd see what we're talking about here. This is the midbrain, and there's the medulla oblongata, the brainstem. In here is the limbic system, and so this is where everything is becoming. The brain is figuring out how to process it. All these neural signals are being interpreted into an overall field. And so the limbic system ends up being, here you can see it coming through the limbic system. The limbic system, there was a paper written once that said, you know, God is in the limbic system. When people have a spiritual experience, when they have holistic resolve, when they're on psychedelics, this is what's being triggered. The limbic system is resolving. So you have this oneness. That's why sports can deliver a very transcendent experience. And the limbic corridor, you can see here that it can trigger the motor response. It can bypass higher functioning. And so that's why that emotional state, you know, you want to be dialed in at an emotional level on a return of service. You know, you can respond faster. Okay, so, and then, so it goes all the way down, it innervates, it comes through the spinal column, innervates the muscle. And basically, this is the motor neuron. So we've heard a lot of talk about the talent code. Has anybody read that book? Talent code. We've had some people here that have read it. You have myelination. The talent code is pointing to these cells that wrap themselves around, these little fatty cells that wrap themselves around the axon of neurons, and they increase the signaling. It's like a bigger bandwidth, basically. So you get better programming. And if you get this exposure to the environment before the age of 7, and sensory motor integration goes in place, you get thicker myelination. So under a magnetic functional MRI machine, you would see greater white matter in the brain along these corridors. And so that became kind of a measurement of talent, because they found that people that were great piano players or great rock climbers that had early exposure before the age of 7, because the plasticity, meaning the capacity of the brain to make changes, is much greater at that earlier age. And it starts to shut down by the age of 9. So the early exposure ends up being really important, and you want the sound of the ball, you want the feel of the ball, you want the noise on the court. You know, the kid is learning from everything. And so the exposure to the actual environment becomes critical. Like I said, it's going to the muscle. The neuron is actually doing the thinking. And so this brings us to proprioception and training. And so for proprioception and training, what I'm going to do here is demonstrate the wobble board, which is this thing right here. And I could use a volunteer, somebody that hasn't been up. Anybody want to come up? And I'm going to show you how we can use the wobble board to, Brody, you want to come up? Come on. To basically teach the stroke. So if I introduce the stroke to somebody that's on the ground, let's say Brody is new to the game, right? Go ahead and stand on there for a second. Feel, it's a wobbly world. Feel the wobble. So now we've taken away his balance a little bit. So but he's watching his body think right now. You're not having to think. You just apply it with the will to be on there, right? So proprioception is adjusting. He's seeing it in action. But this is great for skill acquisition because now I've disrupted his comfort zone, so it's less abstract. So let's go. So let me have you stand off of there for a second. So when I'm teaching this now, I'm going to have the student go to what I call the crouching tiger position. Now, you've seen athletes when they're suspended in the air, the hip flexor comes up here, right? It doesn't stay down here. And that's because they're going to use this hip flexor to turn. So crouching tiger, I like to think of as this position here. Okay, so you're balanced on one leg, and there's a symmetry. There's a counter, there's a counter to the leg coming forward in the coil. So let's go ahead and put you in that position, the crouching tiger position. Yeah. So and he's going on the front foot. So we're loading onto the front foot. Right. Yeah, and it's trickier than you would think, right? So try keeping your back straighter, right? And pull this knee up a little bit. You bring it up here more. Bring the knee forward and coil against it. That looks like it, right? So we've got crouching tiger. Right, I know, it's tough. And so that's great, you got it. So now the next position, and we want to do this slowly, so this is how you can chunk it. So crouching tiger, and then you go, and here the core is being engaged, so the body is actually learning. Like I said, if we do it on the ground, it's too abstract because you don't feel it. It's like you're not feeling yourself in that position you're sitting in, right? But if you were off balance, you would feel how the body's working to make, and here I'm dropping the leg, and here's my lag. So I call this hidden dragon because you're going to sweep it around like a tail of a dragon and take out small armies. And then you're coming up here, and you fight for your balance on that follow through, and I'm kicking the leg back as a counterweight. Just do it slowly, you'll be fine. You're doing it. Yeah, start with the crouching tiger. And really what we're working on here is taking the chunks from one position to the other. So we're going to the lag, I'm on the butt cat going out. So we get to Sarah's position, beautiful, and then shoulder up under the chin. Yeah, so you get the rotation, that's really good. Big hand for Brody right there, right? It's hard to do, but yeah, try it again, do it again. So basically as he does this, all the kids come out and do this, and I think this is like thousands of hours of hitting balls, really. It doesn't replace hitting balls, but what it does is it gives him a feel for how the chunks are transitioning. So now when we go back in, whatever chunk we want to emphasize that day, he's got the body of information there for the stroke as a whole. Hold on, thank you. Thanks, sir. All right, and so then we should probably demonstrate how, with proprioception, you're going to get this automation effect. So listen. If somebody's using proprioceptive, right, it's undulating from the ground up. I don't want them thinking from the top down. I want to turn off the brain. And as the body training is really error correction. So really, what I want Brody to do is use the legs. You're going to grab this position. We're close to the net, and you're going to put the legs right on the baseline, just like that. If he uses anything but the legs, he's probably going to miss it. I'm going to just drop the ball for you here. So I'm just going to drop it. Right again. Here we go. And he's brushing it right to the baseline, and his feet are going to be on the ground. And now what I'd like for you to do is do it more like this. So examine the structure of this. So here obviously we're away from crouching tiger because we're using the ground as ground reaction force. The right knee will be, I just want him to sit down and keep the legs stable and find that baseline, okay? So what I want you to feel is the energy coming right from the ground to find that. Perfect. So So you feel that? So this is a nice way to start where I know he's not doing it anymore. So now come on back, and now when I do these iterations, meaning let's repeat the pattern, I'm looking for high fidelity. So he can make the error, he can get to that follow through in an error-free way. So you just repeat the pattern, and I don't want him cutting loose. I don't want him trying to experiment with it. I just want the pattern to go over and over and over with very little deviation. So you get this high fidelity, basically. From the rote repetition, so as Brody's doing that right over and over, he's getting the automation, you're getting the myelination, the cerebellum is starting to take over. And so this is the cerebellum down here. Again, this is the SMA up here. The SMA is going to work as a feedback loop. So if he's running forward, right in the cord, trying to figure out how to grab that structure, that's what it's going to help him do. What I want to say before we run out of time here is that the SMA also has this area 6. And what you should know about area 6 is that it's also called a supplementary eye field. You have eye neurons there that do not go to the eyes or the occipital lobe. So what does that tell you? Does anybody have any idea what might be going on in the supplementary eye field? The mind's eye, yeah. That's for motor behaviors. So like monkeys jumping from limb to limb, right? So anything that involves having a racket in your hand, running through a court, trying to measure where that ball's going to be and hit it into the court is going to trigger that field. So when you close your eyes and picture, so take a moment, close your eyes, picture yourself serving and volleying, do something very complex that involves movement. That's where you are. And you notice how you're actually seeing it. You have these eye neurons there, and you want to practice that because you get better at it. Einstein was very good at visualizing. As a 5-year-old, he visualized traveling at the speed of light, and that led to some counterintuitive insights about special relativity. And it was the visualization part of his brain that had thicker myelination. Okay, so practice visualization. Bear in mind, like I said, once you get the automation, you're just going into this feel state, the emotional hub, the limbic resolve is what you want. Here's sort of what it looks like. I don't know if you can see this. Brody, you can sit down if you, so you can see it at least. This should be a little bit lower, but it gives you a sense of what the brain is doing there. So as we go from the micro to the macro scale, again, we're going from feel state to awareness, and it's oscillating. It's going back and forth. How we doing? Everybody get it? Get it? Good. All right. And so here we are. We're back at the grid, and there should be a little bit of movement here. So basically, this is chunking. The brain also. Okay. So there's some things I wanted to say in association with this. The brain is also learning the steps backwards. It's memorizing the sequence backwards. So remember that when you're coaching, demonstrate it backwards. Take it. So when we did the loop, you might have seen me do that with Stosh, where I actually took her backwards through the swing. It's a good exercise for you as a coach to kind of picture it backwards. But that's how it's going to remember it. The brain also has its own subjective sense of time. So it's just an approximate. It's not explicit. So think of it like if you go on a ski trip. You're not thinking about the 8 hours necessarily you spent in the car. You're going to think about the 2 hours you went down the mountain, and that'll be, primary. So the feeling at the point of contact will be remembered better than the other components of the swing. But it has its own sense of time. You don't have to see the field explicitly. You're tracking the ball. You don't see it within 6 feet of your body anyway. Okay, so it's a tracking mechanism. There's brain mapping involved. We're going to go over this very quickly. So the racket gets mapped to your brain. The racket becomes an extension. It's a neuroprosthetic. You're imagining feel. So that's how you get the value for feel out of the racket. So just that's why I wanted him with the racket in hand on the proprioceptive, on the wobble board, right? Because it becomes a part of your body then, as a tennis player, that's an extension of our body. You have this thing called the motor homunculus, the sensory homunculus, and data's going in there. This is why you want your kids in the environment. Throw a yellow ball at them while you're doing rogi. Get the yellow balls out there because everything is getting mapped. And this is sort of how it gets mapped. You can see that the hand has the more sensory input, so it's got a bigger area of the brain relegated to it. This is the face over here. Areas that aren't as defined are smaller. But in the motor cortex, you have Golgi tendon organs that are reading the tension in your joints, basically. They're almost like gravitational sensors. So pay attention to where the joints are, because that's where the thinking is occurring. If somebody's joints are out of whack when they're swinging, correct it at the joints. Okay, because that's where the schema of the body is going to organize it when it goes to that supplementary motor area. And so this is showing you the feedback loop to the cerebellum. So as he was repeating that pattern over and over and over, information was traveling to the supplementary area. It was giving him negative feedback, so you could correct it and immediately find it. There's the cerebellum. Cerebellum, hindbrain, reptilian brain. Reptiles have it. It's the reason you're able to sit there right now and control your body as it does. This is who's hitting the tennis ball. Okay, so and then we get to performance mode. So you'll go down the line, he'll go cross court, and then you'll switch off. So Perkins setting up his legs, the information is coming up. And you can see that there's a particular mindset associated with performance play in which he's not overthinking. He's trying to reduce they're both trying to reduce the glucose metabolism of the brain so they can get to where they need to go. The brain needs to process positioning, strategy, tactics, right? The book is coming out, it's being induced. And so this is improvisational subjective induction, basically. It's a program that's gone into place, just like a jazz musician would wire the progressions in there. And then when he hears the external stimulus, when you see the ball, there's a set of options that are going to get queued up from the feel state. And so that's what we're observing. The other thing we're observing is concentration. Notice on Anthony, it's not wired to let any ball get out of his comfort zone. He's incredibly balanced when he hits. You won't see him often. No, he keeps his feet on the ground on this side for an unusual amount of time. And I've been studying the Perkins game, in part because he's at the club, in part because he's made a really profound statement in tennis in the Missouri Valley area. Unbelievable the amount of the gold balls and who he's been able to beat. And it's a very deceptive game. He's not trying to hit big. You can't see why he's really as tough as he is. But he's using the ground. He's using the kinetic sequence. If long periods, he's not overly concerned with his technique. It's just coming out, right? And you can kind of see it in the mindset that he's got. So basically what you were looking at there in the performance was this idea that it's a bottom-up process that we're trying to get to. Proprioceptive control. Thank you, Brody. That was great. Feel state, dynamic instability. Oh, that was the thing I didn't point to, was the ready position when the other guy was hitting, right? That's how they were able to get there. When you're putting the skill in place, it's a top-down process. It's using a lot of energy. It's coming from the top down, the brain, the SMA. You know, you want to go slowly. It's cognitive control. Do it in the first 20 minutes of the lesson. When you put a skill in place, wait 4 hours before you teach something else. Because it goes to this area of the motor cortex where you have these memory cells, but they're only good for 4 hours. And if you, I used to do this all the time. I tried to, that forehand went so well, let's do the backhand. And then I found the kid came out the next day, he didn't remember anything in the forehand. You're basically wiping it out. So if you're really trying to do something, once the thing is in place, obviously you can do a wide array of stuff. But if you're really trying to chunk something or break something down or change something, just do one thing and wait 4 hours for the memory to consolidate. Okay. Also, do it in the first 20 minutes of the lesson. 20 to 40 minutes is basically where you're going to have the freshest energy. So if you're going to tackle something that's going to be tough from the top down, from the brain down, do it early. Okay. And like I said, it's kind of a thinking state. But this is the beauty of what we're doing. We're actually going through skill acquisition, transitioning them, the students, to this whole other thing, which is proprioceptive control, below the attentional awareness, right? And it's this other entity within yourself that's doing the thinking. So it's an extraordinary experience. It opens it up to this whole meditational approach, and that's essentially how the tenocentric approach to consciousness is perceived. It's kind of like a yoga class in the context of this conference, because it comes under the category of wellness. And this is a huge industry, so there are huge implications, I think, if you're the owner of a club and looking to see how to capitalize on this. This whole new territory opens up. Now, obviously, as tennis players, we like to think of ourselves as going in a battle. We don't want to think of it as something that's good for you or that good for you necessarily. So you can play that down, but know in the back of your head that you're giving your students access to something that is really extraordinary in terms of learning, and the whole array of things that can come together is unique. So with that, I'll take questions. Any burning questions? Yes? Right. Okay.
Said from the beginning, when you mentioned something about the chemical signaling, so half-second late, the signal from your brain to your arm, let's say,
right,
is a half-second late. So the point of that, I take, is that's why it's so important to just trust yourself, because you're getting the signal so late.
Right.
The thinking's coming too late for the action.
Right. You can, but know that you have this observer. Consciousness is an observer, right? So you're observing yourself hitting the ball, but the processing, the attentional awareness, like when your awareness went to your toes, is really, there's a little bit of a drag effect there. Yeah. But you can, as you're hitting the ball, you can be aware of it, right? And the brain reconstructs it as a now experience. But you are, in fact, having a now experience. I mean, when you touch yourself, you're experiencing it now, right? But the signaling to the brain is a half-second late. So if anybody here has like the older version of the iPhones, the iPhone 7, they had this button on there, right? The button didn't move, but it was timed with a pulse. When you push the button, your body had a feel for pushing it, so it could control how it was pushing it. But if you turned off the haptic feedback, or if you turned off your phone and you pushed that button, there was nothing there. You realized you were being fooled. But that was a great way to illustrate it. There was a half-second delay in your awareness of the fact that you'd done something, although the body could react to it in real time. So when the ball's on the strings, even though it's below your attentional awareness, you're making adjustments. That's why you get touched on a volley, and you're sort of observing yourself doing that, right? You're processing after it, and you're learning that touch through trial and error. But yeah, so the awareness of it, the processing, it happens in these, what are called these gamma synchrony waves, and so there's a half-second delay when those sort of come on. They take a while to come to speed at that level. But the beta signaling comes on at 10 milliseconds, and that's where the motor memory is. So the beta signaling is where haptic perception is. And when like there's some people that, I have an 85-year-old on the board that's on a drug that knocks out his beta oscillations, and so you get these Parkinsonian symptoms. So that's well in evidence. So I hope that explains it.
Yeah, when I say wakefulness, conscious thinking, the process of doing it.
Yes, conscious thinking while you're in the middle of doing it is counterproductive, yes. Yeah, you want to use the mind as a negative feedback loop. So, if you relate, and this guy's running me, you correct it. But you develop a feel for what's working, and you go from that feel state. Right, Anthony? Thumbs up, all right. Anybody else? Yes?
So if we're trying to focus on, say, backhand,
Right.
first 20 minutes,
Yeah.
work on 20 minutes, what do we do the rest of the remaining 40 minutes?
Well, just don't be attached to what happens in the other. You can let them play, right? So I do the varsity green clinic. These beginner kids come out. We really hit it in the first 20 minutes. Second 20 minutes, we try to drill them. So we take the activity and we create them. And I explain to them that we're trying to automate this, right? And then the second 20 minutes, third 20 minutes, you maybe let them play. And you don't worry about it. You don't try to play. Just let the brain have it. If they do terrible things, let them enjoy it,
You don't try to correct it for the rest of the
You don't try to correct it for the rest of the time, right? You leave them alone at that point. and let them just unwind, and wait about 4 hours before you try to hit them with something else, or wait till the next day. Any other questions? Now, all of this information is accessible. I'm right here. I'm in town at the OP Racket Club. You know, neuroscience is inherently complex, but I think this information longs to be understood. And we're asking people to come into the environment and learn these really complex motor behaviors, right? And we see that if kids are just in the environment long enough, they get it, you know? And this is the same way. I mean, that's basically what I did. I just went, you know, I didn't belong there. I was just some guy that was like wanting to teach tennis and understand how it works. But I went, I sat in those environments, and, you know, I soaked it all up. You know, it's 8 days of just pure lectures, and you just get, you know, you get exposed to all this information. And then pretty soon, you know, you're privy to the dialogues, you know, that are going on, and you begin to, you know, you look up words that you don't understand, you know, and then all of a sudden a picture starts coming together. So don't be intimidated by, you know, the nature of it, but know that this is really relevant to what we're doing, and, you know, we might be in the front lines of understanding it. The other piece of this that should be said in terms of understanding consciousness, one of the breakthroughs that happened at this conference was a philosophical formulation by this guy named David Chalmers that's considered, you know, really this huge thing, and he defines this as the hard problem in consciousness. And what he's saying is there are things that are difficult to explain, like, you know, how the eye sees, how hearing occurs, but all of these can be solved through neurocomputationalism, meaning we can, they're basic computational processes. You can see how the signals are coming in and being turned into this. What we can't explain is why we have a feeling, why we have a subjective feeling associated with the sunlight on the skin, or a rose, or the feeling of a ball feeling good, right? There's no algorithm to describe that. And so this philosophical formulation is called the hard problem of consciousness. And it points to this thing called qualia. Qualia is, why do we have this subjective representation of reality that we're not experiencing the space directly? So basically, we're in the hologram right now, right? And so that presented a real problem for the neural doctrine. And that's why this conference became such a landmark thing, you know, and some of the greatest minds on the planet are converging there, so it's just fun to go. I see Bill down there, since he's the tennis brain. And Bill is very knowledgeable about neuroscience. When I was coming back, he was primarily somebody that I compare notes with. What I want to say about that is that if anybody is in Tucson in April, you know, let me know. Make sure that, you know, sneak you in. The subjective, the idea of the subjective experience and the inner game, I think, is kind of another piece of it. Know that it's going on within, right? Reality's out there. You're limited in what you can know about it because you're processing it with this conscious experience. And that approximate of reality is really, so how the kid imagines hitting the ball might be more important than, you know, the explicit information that he's trying to derive from external stimulus. So that you really are working within that hologram, that inner hologram. So that's why when Woody, yesterday we were talking about observation, and I said, you know, there was an intrinsic observation and extrinsic. Extrinsic is saying, I'm looking at where the ball is going. Intrinsic, I'm looking at what the kid is trying to do. So this is pointing to this process-driven approach, where in order for learning to occur, in order to get those strokes, you have to sort of, you know, try to understand what's going on within that person and not maybe worry about the results through the skill acquisition period, right? So you put it in place, you know, you trust that that environment's going to enable them to come up to speed, and you observe how it's doing it and you just steer the ship, but you don't force it through. Okay, I think I'm out of time, right? Okay, thank you.